Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janet Smith, and Professor of Economics and also the Faculty Director for the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Each year, the CIE supports a number of workshops, speaking events, competitions, and networking events, and this is one of those. Our goal is to promote all things entrepreneurial. Today's panel discussion is the kickoff event for our annual Entrepreneurship Week. I wanted to let you know about the schedule for the rest of the week. Tomorrow we have another ATH event. It should be very exciting. It's on new virtual reality technologies, and you'll have a chance to try out the VR equipment for yourself, the Oculus and the Samsung, I think. So that should be fun. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do so. And we're going to be hosted by a startup team working on software in that area. On Thursday, we have a session with Crunch Fund. That's an early-stage startup, early-stage venture capital fund that was started by some CMCers, and they'll be here to talk to us about that. And on Friday, near the Bauer Center, we're going to have a venture fair where students from the 5 Cs will present their startups and showcase what they've accomplished so far with their work. So the topic of our panel discussion today is women in the world of high tech. And I want to thank the participants so much for coming, agreeing to being with us and visiting their alma mater. It was very nice of you to make the trip down for today. And also a big thank you to Professor Manfred Kyle, who's at the back of the room, who was highly instrumental in putting this event together. Also wanted to thank Professor Fred Lynch, who's in the middle here, who kindly agreed to moderate this event. Fred, if you don't know him, is a sociologist and a member of our government department here. He focuses much of his teaching and research on policy issues pertaining to inequality, occupational trends, healthcare, and social and demographic change. He's the author of an impressive number of books on these important kinds of policy topics. And he currently is studying how Silicon Valley and the high-tech industry are responding to demands for greater workforce diversity, and hence the topic for today. So with those brief remarks, I'll turn the session over to Fred Lynch, who will introduce the topic and our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see everybody here. Usually when the topic turns to high-tech or Silicon Valley, people tend to pay notice and show up, so hooray, hooray. We've got a special angle on this, and that is a fairly new and controversial topic with regard to Silicon Valley, and that is, how are women faring in this new and burgeoning and very fast-paced industry? And again, this is generating a lot of controversy. My main purpose here, again, I'm doing some research on how Silicon Valley is responding or not responding to issues of workforce diversity, but our stars here are going to be the people who are really out there. So what I would like to do is simply, set things up with a few major questions, give some data very briefly, sort of a sketch of what is out there now in terms of general stats, and then we will turn it over to the voices of people who are negotiating this terrain. We have a really distinguished panel, and let them introduce themselves. Let me ask by beginning, how many of you have watched the HBO series Silicon Valley? Okay, yeah, it's a fun series, generally very critically acclaimed, and say, that it's an accurate portrayal of Silicon Valley, in fact, to a fault. One major bad criticism that came back to Mike Judge, the creator and producer and writer on this series, was the first 2 years, the cast was almost entirely white male and Asian male. And so when confronted with this initially, he said, so, that's the way it is. That's the way Silicon Valley is. But he went ahead and added some female characters, which is better than maybe Silicon Valley itself did. But the first question, therefore, is Mike Judge right? Is that the way it is? And is that sort of the attitude in Silicon Valley? So what? And if that is the case, why is it that way? Why do we have an imbalance? And third, what can we or should we do about it? So we're going to discuss this world all in about 30 minutes. I'd like to save the last 15 or 10 minutes or so for Q&A. And by the way, we can, ramble on here after 1 p.m., which is the official adjournment time, because I know classes start at 1:10. We're willing to hang out and talk for a while. So that's sort of the agenda here. And let me deal with the first question. Is it that way? The answer is yes. Women and also Latinos and blacks are severely underrepresented in the workforces, not only of the high-tech industry, but of the venture capital firms that fund a lot of the startups. And this was an area of contention because the big firms wouldn't even put out their data on this. And suddenly, boom, they opened up the data files in the spring of 2014, and it hit the fan, so to speak, using a technical term here. It was discovered that Google, Apple, Microsoft, Intel, and most of the other big firms had a workforce of about 30% female. And in terms of the high tech, the coveted high tech, high paying jobs, only about 15% were female. And furthermore, not surprisingly, as you move up the leadership ladder, you have even fewer women. There was a study by leanin.org and McKinsey that found that across 8 economic sectors, tech has the second lowest proportion of women in the top executive positions, or the coveted C-suites, 15%. The highest, by the way, were in media and telecom at 25%, having female executives. Middle management, a little better, about 25% of middle management positions in tech are female, but again, compared to the other sectors, still second from the bottom. The highest representation of women in middle management was in healthcare, I teach a course on healthcare, and media and telecom, 40%. So one of the reasons for the low tech numbers, by the way, is not only people coming in and trying to move up, but large numbers, a disproportionate number of women leave tech business, particularly at the mid-level. And in terms of getting money, in case women want to start up their own businesses, we got kind of a mixed picture. There's good news, bad news. There's a study by Crunchbase that found that nationally, the percentage of startups with at least one woman founder that received funding rose from 9.5% in 2009 to 18% in 2014, so almost doubled in terms of nationwide funding for startups with at least one woman as a partner. However, a study just released last week, it was in the Wall Street Journal, found that in the Bay Area, which of course is the mother lode of all this, out of 204 startups that received what they call A-level funding from major investors, just about 16 firms, or 8%, were headed by women, and this was down almost a third, 30%, from the previous year. And as I indicated a couple minutes ago, this might be because the venture capital industry is even more disproportionately headed by men, particularly white men or Asian men, than female. The figures here are harder to get a hold of, but roughly it's estimated that maybe 4% of venture capital firms, particularly the larger and middle-sized ones, have female CFOs or senior partners. So those are the data, the descriptive data. The question is, how come? Why is this? Why do we have this lack of representation of women? The spokesperson for the tech industries will immediately say, pipeline problem. Got a big pipeline problem in terms of women, also blacks and Latinos, going into STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, or getting other certificates or other experiences that would lead you into jobs in tech and up the career ladder and so forth. So they say it's a credential and training problem that starts way back. Is sexism a problem, maybe? Well, there was an Atlantic survey of 101 executives, innovators, and thinkers that rated sexism in the industry as a 7 out of a scale of 1 to 10. So yeah, moderate to high. On the other hand, in the boardroom, there was another survey done by Price Waterhouse, a survey of 880 board members that found that 35% of the male board members thought thought gender diversity was very important. In other words, about 2/3 in. Of the few female board members, almost 2/3 said, hey, this is a problem. So, if you're going to do anything about it, you've got to recognize the problem. And so that's sort of the lay of the land. Yes, there are these imbalances. There is underrepresentation. You've got a problem with people leaving. And, what do we do about it? So we'll talk about all that, but I want to turn now to our stars, our voices from Silicon Valley. And we want to find out, how each of you made it out there, how you got interested, because one of the things we hear, oh, women aren't interested in this kind of thing. How you got interested, who nurtured your interests, your valuable experiences or not so valuable experiences here at CMC, how you got your first job, mentoring, networking, maybe work-family issues, and so on. But first, let me just have each person identify herself and, where you're working now, and again, maybe how you got into it. And then we'll come around to, your college experiences and other things, since you got your first job. So let's begin, sort of move this way.
Hi, I'm Candace. I work at Google now. After graduating in 2010, I went to the Federal Reserve to do economics research. And I started at Google in 2013, also doing sort of econometrics and data analysis. And I'm still there. Hi, I'm Jacinth. I graduated in 2011. Right after graduation, I went to Google for about a year and a half doing content management for the Geo products. Then in about late 2012, I saw that Uber was hiring for jobs, saw a tweet that they were looking for a community manager, applied through that, and I've been there since. So my 3-year is this Thursday. Currently, I'm focusing on product support management for development products like uberPOOL and UberEATS.
So mind your Twitter accounts, yeah.
Hi, I'm Mayumi, and I'm currently the Senior Director of Product and Business Operations. I'm much older than all these people. So I graduated in 2001, and I went actually to consulting, and people often ask me consulting versus tech, and I'm a huge proponent of consulting, so if anyone wants to talk about that, let me know. But after 3 years of living in New York, I then moved from Deloitte to Google. And unfortunately, I don't have a great story here. I was changing my life, and I saw Google's website, and they had a lot of really fun photos of young people. Not the reason you want to choose a company, but the other side story there is I applied to Google in 2004, pre-IPO. At the time, my program was only letting in basically Stanford and Ivy League students. And my resume came up to Larry and Sergey and Eric, and there was a college on there called Claremont McKenna. Unfortunately, the person sitting next to them was Jonathan Rosenberg, and said, that person must be smart. She went to my college. So I am still to this day indebted to Jonathan Rosenberg, which I say, tell everyone, do not do that. Absolutely don't get indebted to him. But no, he's been awesome. Anyway, so I was there at Google for 5 years. I lived in Asia and in London with Google. Then I went to Mozilla Firefox, and I led their product marketing team. Then I went to Stanford, got my master's degree in management science and engineering, and then ended up for the last 3.5 years at a startup called Electric Imp, where I currently am part of the executive team, and have been part of funding and have been part of really helping with the company grow. We started when I started it was 7 people, and now we're at 40.
Hi, I'm Christy Howard, and I graduated in May from CMC, and I was part of the 3-2 program. So I was I left CMC in 2013, graduated in 2015, and I was at Columbia, and I did a BS in computer science while I was there for 2 years. Right after I graduated, I spent the summer teaching for Girls Who Code, which is a nonprofit organization that hosts we call it a summer immersion program. So it basically is for juniors and seniors in high school, all girls, and it's a really awesome program that teaches them all sorts of computer science concepts throughout the whole summer. After that finished in August, I moved to a company called Docker. It's a software startup in San Francisco, and I'm a software engineer there. I've been there now for about 6 months, and I work as a front-end developer there. So I guess how I got into tech was actually I took over a summer internship from another CMC student who I took data structures with. And my manager there actually hired me at Docker this year. And I also had 2 really great internships at Intuit, and that was part of their idea jam that they host here at CMC. So that was definitely a really awesome opportunity and a really great way to get into product management and engineering and get into a tech firm.
Okay, very good. Let's turn, since we have many college students here, to this is sort of how you did it. And but talk a little bit about your choice of classes at CMC, internships while you were here. We're sort of looking about what advice you would give to the younger folks, even though you're not all that mature yourselves yet, at least in terms of my thinking. But anyway, what advice you would give because there's a lot of rumbling. Students are thinking, oh, I've got to take at least 1 computer class, maybe 2 computer classes. We've got a computer sequence. There's actually talk of maybe, I don't know whether I should say this, maybe a computer science major, and people going down to MUD and people going over to Pomona. Is it really necessary to get all that much tech in college, or can you get these kinds of jobs with a history, gov, or English lit major? What would you say? Let's go the same route here.
So when I can't tell if this is like.
Is that your?
Yeah. Okay. So I was an econ major. When I went to the Fed and started doing research, turned out I needed a coding background. I had some from doing research here, and I learned a lot more on the job. But I think, in general, it's definitely easier to get hired, and you'll do a better job if you have a coding background and you get some experience while you're in college. So I don't think that means necessarily getting a full CS degree, but definitely getting some experience. I think you guys are all paying $50,000 a year to be at a private college, and I think the really big difference between going to CMC and going to, say, like a UC is you can form relationships with professors here that will give you the opportunity to do research, to work at the research institutes. There's a lot of institutes here, and that's probably the best thing that I did that helped me get hired at the Fed after that, and get the experience that I needed to make myself hireable. So in terms of classes, I think probably the most important classes I took were econometrics, because I went and did econometrics work after school, and I would have taken CS if I'd known at the time. And I hear now they're doing more CS at CMC, and I think that's really great.
By the way, we do have a Silicon Valley program where we put people into position. Would you have taken advantage of that program in your opinion?
So I wasn't really interested in tech when I was in school. I got interested afterwards. I don't know if I would have taken advantage of it, but what I would have done is I would have taken, so I don't know if I would have wanted to necessarily do a tech internship, but I would have wanted more statistics and coding, more data analysis, and more data analysis from the computer science standpoint as opposed to just the math standpoint. So to the extent that that's offered in the Silicon Valley program, maybe I would have done it.
So you were headed to the Fed initially, or something like that, and then sort of sidestepped into?
Yeah, more or less. So I was doing like data analysis and research at the Fed for economics, and then when I moved to Google, I was still doing data analysis and research, just instead of applying it to economic problems, I started applying it to different kinds of problems, the problems that the tech industry was interested in.
So freshmen don't need to have their whole career map like for the next 20 years when they come to CMC? Okay.
Definitely not.
So
Yeah.
change
I think
happened.
I started as an international relations major my freshman year. So.
Yeah.
So I majored in PPE and econ, and really I was probably more PPE and gov, but I was RDS, so I had to take some more econ classes, and that's how I defaulted to get that double. For me, the way that I learned most and got interested in tech was working at the Rose. And during the summers, I didn't do any tech internships. My dad's actually a professor of computer science at the University of Wisconsin, so I ran away from computer science as much as possible. I did not want to do what he was doing. But then at the Rose Institute, we did a lot of really awesome projects, research projects, but then we put them online. So my junior year, we started to actually redo our own website, not being under cmc.edu/Rose, but having the Rose Institute website. Had to really learn just core front end, HTML, CSS, but learning things like Joomla, Drupal, WordPress, how to take PHP and edit it to make our website different. And I don't necessarily think that you need to take computer science really to be able to go into tech. And frankly, I think that having the PPE background serves me a lot better in many ways because you can learn to code later. I've been taking classes at General Assembly in front end and back end, but what you kind of learn in terms of just philosophical analysis, learn about leadership, how to really approach cases from all different sides, you get that from majoring in something else, honestly, at CMC. The one thing, though, having been a hiring manager, I want people who know SQL, and I think that you see some of these other types of languages doing data analysis. You have the opportunity to do that when you're taking a gov class, though. My thesis was in law and econ. Like, you have to understand data analysis in those cases. Audit a comp sci class while you're here, while you have the time. It's amazing, but don't feel pegged in to being a comp sci major to go into tech.
So liberal arts is good for you.
Yes.
Wonderful to hear. Okay, Naomi?
Did not know what an IPO was when I applied to Google, and so I didn't know anything about tech. I don't know how I ended up there, but I can say I did take the Latin of computer science languages, which was Pascal. I don't even think they teach that anymore. I think it was the last year they ever taught it at CMC, but I was horrible at it. So first of all, if you do take a CS class, you don't need to ace it. But learning the general principles of CS is absolutely required if you're ever going to interact with engineers. You do not need to code, but being able to speak their language and understand what they're talking about is very, very essential. And so I would highly recommend taking at least one class to really get that exposure. So I was very lucky I took that class on a whim. For me, what it is Silicon Valley is all about passion. And so you see people who can grow in a company because they know, let's say, sports scoring really, really well. They have no CS, but they know sports scores really well, and they can build an app. And that's how you end up being successful in Silicon Valley. It is absolutely not about your tech background. If you can go into an interview having no CS, but you can basically tell the product manager, here are 5 things that I would change about your product. Here's the new UI that I would suggest to you. I guarantee you're probably going to get that second interview versus just going in there spewing off what they think you're supposed to say. Is really, really about passion. And the other thing that I've really seen is Silicon Valley is also maturing. And so initially it was about CS, but nowadays, oh my gosh, Silicon Valley desperately needs writers. Worst writers, I think, are in Silicon Valley. And so a lot of attention is given to data analytics, to CS, but at the end of the day, they need artists, right? Graphic art, all those logos that you see, UI, a lot of that is graphic design. So if you think about it, if you're passionate about art, think about it, well, can I become a graphic designer and then work for another company? Absolutely, you could go and work for a Google if you have it. Look at the Google Doodles. So for me, that's really what I've seen, and that's really what I would push any of you to do, is go for, because the other is in an interview. I've done 1,000+ interviews, I think. I can tell people who are BSing it in an interview, and I can tell people who are absolutely passionate about what we're talking about at the startup. And I think it's really important because nowadays everyone applying, they're all 4.0, you know, not 1600 SAT, but high up there. You know, you really need to stand out, and the only way you can do that is by being passionate about what you're talking about in your interview.
You mean you have to go through the admissions process all over again?
Yes, basically. I had to give my SAT scores to Google.
Okay. Would you have gone on the Silicon Valley program if you'd been here?
I probably not. I actually used it. I went to Africa, and for me, I wanted to disassociate my study abroad program with something I was very passionate about, which happened to be conservation. I was an EEP major, and that to me, what ended up happening was in all my interviews during college, and then for my probably Google, seeing Africa on my resume was a really good talking point, and I was able to talk about it and be sincere about it, and that probably got me more second and third round interviews than being able to ace the case study.
Yeah, as in college admissions, you know, it's the name of the game is what makes you different, what makes you distinctive, as well as, you know, good grades, good SATs, you know, assume. So what else have you got for us? So, okay, Christy?
So I have a lot of things I could say about this. But I think the biggest piece of advice I have is that you do not have to be a computer science major, like they said, to be successful in tech. However, the more technical or CS classes that you take, the better off you will be. And the more that you take, there's kind of this hump, I think, after about 4 or 5 classes where you start to feel confident in your ability, and you can start to pick up other languages much more easier. So I think whatever makes you passionate, stick with that as much as you can, take a CS class, take 2. Try out something on, Code Academy. Just try something. I think looking back on what scared me about computer science and about the classes and what was really intimidating and what helped, I think the best thing was getting a group. I have 2 girls who, one of them I actually swam with, and they're both software engineers now in Silicon Valley. One of them did the computer science sequence, and one stayed an extra semester to do a psychology and computer science double major. But we kind of always had a group where we were able to talk about our frustrations and that it was hard, but we knew we would get through it together, and that, I can't even tell you how important that was, especially as you get kind of, in certain classes, you'll be one of very few girls if you're a woman, and that can be intimidating and hard to kind of come to terms with. But get yourself a little support group and just say, you know what, guys, like, we're gonna do this together. It's gonna be hard. We might fail. You probably won't actually fail the course, but you might get a B. It's fine. But that's, just try it and be okay with the fact that it is going to be hard. It is something that is so different. Learning to code is so different than learning anything else, but it is so awesome once you get to the point where you can say, oh, I know how to do this in this language and this language and this language. You know what? I can build anything that I want to. I don't have to wait for somebody else. I don't have to ask someone else to do it for me. I can do it for myself. I can build this website with my friends, that kind of thing. Get a support group. Take at least 1 class. That's my my pitch, and take as many as you can, as you feel comfortable doing, while still keeping, I think, what makes you a true CMC student and kind of the liberal arts spirit alive by being different. And you don't have to be the same computer science major as everybody else. Like, it's very awesome, the more background and different experiences, different classes that you bring.
How many of the rest of you felt at times that I'm the only one here, I'm the only woman here, and again maybe felt, gee, there are all these other guys, and how many, again, the only one, that you were sort of unique and that this was off-putting, and how did you deal with it? Either one of you ever run into these?
I definitely have at work. I think interacting with our product teams. So the product team that I was working most closely with, it's all men, and then me coming in from more of the operational angle, but it's something you don't necessarily notice at first, but then I was actually much more cognizant of it preparing for this.
So I think I've had a similar experience. As you said, there's very few women in like the high tech part of Google. I think only like 15% in software engineering. And the building I work in is, very few women, 1 in 10. You look around, you don't really see any. One of the things I noticed was when I go into meetings with other software engineers, their first assumption was that I must be in marketing or in sales, and they sort of directed technical questions elsewhere. So there is some sort of unconscious bias that happens at work when, just because statistically there are more women in those fields at Google than there are in the software engineering. So they've started doing some training, unconscious bias training that's, I think it's maybe mandatory now, that sort of tries to address unconscious biases that people have about, not just about gender, but also about race, about age, about all these different areas, to sort of point out to people that, like, even though you're not a racist, you're not a sexist, but you still probably have these unconscious biases, and sort of addresses that and retrains people to not make those assumptions when they see you. And I think that's been really helpful. And I think across the board, the tech companies, but I can speak personally to Google, they are really trying to address this and trying to really get more women in the workplace and try to remind people that just because someone's a woman doesn't mean that she's not a software engineer or not in the tech part of the company.
Yeah, by the way, they're on PBS NewsHour, I think it's still on their website, about 2 weeks ago. They did a very good 2-part study of diversity in Silicon Valley, and the second part was almost all centered at Google, and the bias training they're doing there. Did you want to add anything about being the only one, or the?
So I've been very fortunate up until I did join a startup. I've been have had amazing women to lead me at Google. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg, Sukhinder, there's a laundry list of amazing women. And so I never really felt that, and I was in product, and I really felt it. I have seen the most, I would say, sexism and outright just women being singled out as I've now approached and become part of more of the investment side. And I have been through several VC pitches up and down Sand Hill, and I've probably talked to 50 VCs, and 2 had women. So really, at the end of the day, this is where I see the most of it. It's also, I'm part of our board meetings, and I'm the only woman in the room. And I think the big thing for me is there are a lot of undertones. I've never had that sexism straight to my face, but it's the conversations. The men get asked about football. They get asked about technical things, assuming I don't know any of that. And I think that part really is what gets to me. And I think people think that it's subtle, so therefore it's not an issue. But I can say that what you really see then is people invest in people that are like them. And so I do have several female friends who've done startups. And yes, there are more female founders, but all my female friends were asked during their pitches why they did not do a fitness, a fashion, or a shopping startup. So yes, they are more founders, but why is it that women have to do fashion in order to be a successful founder? So that to me is where you see a lot of it, and it trickles down because a lot of the VCs then sit on boards. And so that is where I'm seeing a lot of this. And it is funny because you can't find stats, and I almost think that they always focus on Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, et cetera, on the ratio of male to female. No one has really done an in-depth story on the VC, and given how much money they put in, the billions of dollars they put in, you have to assume that is driving some of what's going on in Silicon Valley.
Okay, 2 questions I want to quickly get to. We had a phone conference, by the way, us high-tech types, and the phone conference broke down initially, so I've forgotten who it was that rescued us. We had one of the dial-in numbers and a code, and it broke down. So who was it that set us up with?
We use Zoom.
Okay, yeah, okay. So we finally had our phone conference. 2 quick questions. First of all, one of the big issues that comes up with women in Silicon Valley is work-family issues, work-family balance. And again, this may have something to do with mid-level, mid-career, middle management women leaving the field. Just wondered how many of you had either run into this or heard from other women talking about, how difficult it might or might not be to deal with, child care, elder care, issues like that.
So my take on that is, the tech companies in particular are really chronically understaffed. They are constantly looking to get as many people as they can working for them, and that also includes retention. So when they have women dropping out of their workforce or dropping out of their company in the middle of their life because they want to take care of children, that hurts them. It hurts their bottom line. They need more people to work for them. So I think a lot of them have started to try to be really generous with perks and benefits, like 9-month maternity leaves and things like that, but it still definitely is an issue. The main question I have is, why should it affect women more than it affects men? Like, why should women be the ones, taking care of the kids in the first 6 months, but shouldn't it be equal? Shouldn't there be, aside from the obvious biological issues, it seems like we should see roughly the same dropout rates with men and women, but we're really not. So I think I haven't had these issues yet, but definitely anecdotally, a lot of people I know have. So there's still a long way to go there.
Yeah, I think that's something too, or not something I've personally experienced, but we were just talking about before this a little bit about what are the ways that you can facilitate having that better work-life balance, more or less, whether or not it's really operating in this results-oriented type of work environment where you support work from home, where you enable somebody to not have to commute from SF to the South Bay, let them work there so they don't have to spend all that additional time, can spend that time with their family in that way. But also thinking more about how it really is advantageous if you have somebody who's been at the company for a certain period of time, who has that institutional knowledge. Every new head you bring on, there's an additional overhead cost to that, to rehiring, to get somebody in, to get them ramped up before they can fully be producing. And by kind of having somebody not be able to easily come back, you lose that from the recruiting side very much too. So it really is important to have opportunities either like daycare on site or having these types of other ways that let women come back after if you've departed for a period of time to engage and kind of start performing at that same high level again.
You were saying you have a 2-hour commute?
I used to when I was at Google. Luckily, Uber's in the city now,
Oh, okay, yeah, so-
but it's a lot. It's hard to commute.
You
and a
say
lot of
you
people
can
leave.
ride the white Google buses and people throw rocks at you and stuff like that, but yeah, they have a whole fleet apparently of their own buses
Yeah.
that go for San Francisco. Amy, I know you could go on for hours. Try and give us just a few nuggets on this. This is a big concern of yours.
Yeah, so I would say that when I was in my 20s, I also was astounded. I didn't really understand why there weren't as many women. And now that I'm at that age where most of my girlfriends, all very successful, even my mentors and mentors, they've all, now that they've had kids, had to make and reprioritize. And so you can't, like a lot of tech companies do make these benefits, but really what I'm seeing is a struggle, and it's not that men don't have it, but there is definitely a struggle for women when they go back to work and they have to balance, and I know they hate the word balance, but I mean, you're at work, you probably have a nanny. If you're going to do a startup, go into the nanny world. It's amazing in Silicon Valley. But, you know, a lot of these women, they did not grow up with nannies. And now they have to hire nannies 8 to 10 hours. I mean, just the cost alone post-tax is absolutely insane. So you have to almost have a job to have a nanny. And then the other is you have this person at home, and then you go to work for 8 or 10 hours, and then you really struggle with what's going on at home. I want to see my kid. I want to see them grow up. And it's not that mothers, you know, my mother didn't struggle with this, but I think what's ended up happening is then a lot of my friends have then just dropped out of the workforce because they have just decided that that's not a priority for them. Their job is no longer a priority, and it's hard because they do end up taking 2 or 3 or 4 years until their kid can go to school, and things have moved so fast that they're just basically overlooked. And I think the problem is I've actually seen men do the same, but sometimes it's because they go on world trips or they decide to do something else, and for them to re-enter the market is much, much higher. For some reason, I think this is a problem, is as if you go on maternity leave and you lose all your brain cells and you somehow digress. That's really what, there's this weird assumption. And so that's what I'm seeing a lot of the women right now, is that they're choosing to leave and they have the fortune to be able to do that, but it's so hard for them to then enter. And also it's a priority thing. And I think when I was in my 20s, I had very, very different priorities than I have now. And finally, I can just say the harshest critics in this space are the women on other women. And I've really seen this. I've seen women who've decided not to have kids. I've seen women who have nannies. I've seen women who just want to be stay at home. And they criticize other women and their choices. And I can tell you right now that I think that to me is what undermines a lot of this as well, is that you're not having women support each other in the decisions that they make. And that continues, and I think that's where also sometimes men can pick up, well, then I don't know why that woman can't work if she can work, and it really becomes a problem. So the other is you really should be supportive of what decisions other women make, because you don't know their circumstances, you don't know their priorities, and that's not for you to judge.
Kristie?
So I work at a startup. We're about 230 people, and our VP of engineering is a woman, and she has kids. And even though my team is about 18 men, and myself, I've seen on a few other teams that there are female engineers who have young children, and I think it helps having a woman with children at the head of our engineering organization, because I think I've seen for them that they're able to get the flexible hours that they need, that people are able to work from home. And I've seen that 2 of the engineers on my team who are fathers, and they live in, you know, we work in the city and they live in the South Bay, that they'll say, you know, I have to stay at home, like staying with the kids today, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the beauty of software engineering is that as long as you have your laptop, you're pretty much good. And so I think I've seen at my company a really kind of refreshing sense that you can take control of what you need to do for your personal life and work from home when you need to support your family or whatever other obligations you have. But then when you are at the office, being really present there is important.
Very quickly, each of you, if you had been a male, go back a few years, if you had been a male, would your career have been any different, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I experienced really any direct sexism in the hiring process. I think, like I said, they're trying to hire as many people as they can. If that means hiring a woman, if it means hiring a man, if it means hiring someone from another country, whatever, they want people who are qualified. So personally, no, I don't think it would have been different for me.
I'd like to believe it wouldn't have, but I think probably realistically it would have. I think in some ways, especially as you're moving from something more operational based to more of that tech side that Candace was talking about, moving more into product, it is a lot easier to kind of have mentors or people who will seek you out and pull you in a lot of these companies just by nature of there being more males in it.
I don't think so for myself. I can give 2 pieces of advice though. Start on the same level as your male counterpart, so always ask for a salary increase when you get an offer letter. 99% of the males I give offer letters to ask for a salary increase. About 5% of women ask for it, so always ask. Don't go way over. But the other is, if you're going to go to tech, and I was talking to Professor Smith about this, understand options, understand stock. I can tell you males are so much more versed, so they can ask the right questions to get better options in their offers and better just terms around those. So if you know how to go into those conversations and set the playing field the same, then that's really what you should be doing. I don't think I would be different if I was a male, but having that knowledge would have helped me a lot.
Having just gone through the interview and hiring process, that is really, really, really good advice that you should take to heart for sure. I think it would be different if I were male, and I think it comes into play the most in the like networking or just kind of the general sense of when I was, especially at Columbia, because Columbia was, I noticed it a lot more that I was one of the only female students there, a lot more than I did when I was taking computer science classes at Pomona. It would be, like 4 to 10 women in a class of 100, 120, 160, and I would notice just when I asked people, oh, do you want to work on this together? They would always be like, oh, no. Until they, would look over and they're like, oh, you beat me. Like, oh, do you want to work on this together? And it was, I'm not saying that to brag. I'm only saying that because it was really, 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 really hard to find people to work with, and I felt like I had to prove myself over and over and over and over and over for people to take me seriously as an engineer. And I have a lot of male friends who are engineers, and it comes to them much more easily that they're just accepted as a good engineer without having to kind of give that proof of, here is a test score, here is, a GPA, here is this like program I built. Someone will say, oh yeah, I'm an engineer, and they're like, oh cool, and they start talking to you about engineering, versus I'll say, oh, I'm an engineer, and they're like, oh, you don't look like an engineer, which that's a separate issue. But I think I think this problem can be solved by getting more women in engineering. So my ask for all of you women out here is to take some classes, come join us in any capacity in tech. More women is awesome, and I think that once it stops being, oh, you're, the only woman investor in the room, oh, you're the only, there are 20% females here, that I think a lot of those biases will start to kind of disappear, as it's not abnormal to see that. And I think sometimes it is hard if you are that person who's the one or one of the few. I think from any sort of identity that is underrepresented, that's going to be really hard. But try and find a network of people and just be there. And as long as you're happy and you have a good job and you're able to make a difference, like, keep working at it, because you might be the one person that somebody else needs to see and say, oh, I can stay here. Oh, I can be successful here. So that's my ask to all of you. And for the men out there, if a woman tells you, oh, I'm in engineering, do not tell them, oh, you don't look like an engineer. Oh, I wouldn't have expected that. Ask them about their work. Ask them what you would ask a male in engineering. Treat them like you would a male. That's my ask.
Sort of our moral of the story, more women in tech is awesome. So questions. advice freely given. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Emily Grant. I'm one of the student managers at the CIE, so thank you so much for coming. This is really awesome. I worked at Salesforce last summer, and I kind of wanted to address what Mayumi kind of started to talk about, that salary gap and salary negotiations for women versus men. And Salesforce has just done about $3 million to kind of balance that out so that women and men are being paid the same amount. There is a discrepancy there. So I was just kind of curious if you have asked your male counterparts the salaries that they're making and then have gone in and done sort of salary negotiations for yourself and advice you can have as a woman doing that kind of negotiation.
I have a comment on that. So recently Google did a study of its own internal, so the way promotion works at Google is you self-nominate. When you're ready for promotion, you say, I want to go up for promotion, and then you put together a packet and you're considered. And they did a study and they noticed that women were much, much less likely to self-nominate versus men, but when they went up for promotion, they were just as likely to get promoted. So they were just as qualified, but sort of more timid and more humble, say maybe, than, or maybe less ambitious in terms of self-nomination than men were. So I think, like Mayumi was saying, with not asking for a higher salary, I think it data supports it is something that is different across the genders. And so women should remember, like, they maybe need to compensate for that. Knowing that men are going to be more aggressive, you should also be more aggressive, even if it's not like what you're used to doing. So.
One other point on that, I think to what Mayumi was bringing up, is just knowing how things work and kind of the lingo to use. I didn't know that I could negotiate my equity package when I started at Uber. I thought, okay, I can now feasibly try to negotiate salary, but it just didn't even dawn on me that equity was something one would negotiate. So I think kind of understanding first what can you negotiate, but also what are the comp bands that exist to know what a reasonable pitch is in terms of what you're actually going to do. And sometimes it is going to be asking other people because the information isn't public. Although there was the story at Google where people start just putting their salaries in a spreadsheet, which was really interesting because you start seeing all these discrepancies, but you need to understand what to negotiate to be able to actually successfully do it.
And I would just say, regardless of male or female, always make sure too that you have a manager who is brutally honest with you with your feedback, because you need to be able to go into any conversation, whether it's a new job or existing, with a really good understanding of what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and to be able to either go back to your manager and what your manager said, or to have done your market research. But to be able to validate what you're trying to prove is really, really important, because at the end of the day, I think men tend to go in there and say, I deserve a promotion, and it just may be because the feedback they're getting from their manager, and there was a recent study about this, tends to be more, I think one of you mentioned, to be more skill set based, right? Like, you should go work on this skill, versus women, it tends to be more attitude. And all my several female friends, like, you know, you really don't approach that with the right attitude. Or when someone confronts you, you always roll your eyes. Like, that to me is not, you're not moving up in the management. So really make sure that the manager you're also working with is giving you those types of skills too, so that you can also say, well, I don't understand why this person got a promotion and I didn't. And if you really should be looking at it from a skill to skill, not an attitude, and you basically kind of have that conversation, versus if you're not getting that feedback, you don't really have concrete, that's going to be a lot harder to really justify why you should be getting a promotion.
So again, I recently went through all of this for my first big full-time role, and I'd read what you had said about women. Part of, you know, the pay gap can be explained by women not negotiating at your starting salary, your first job, and that just, you know, that compounds over and over and over into creating a bigger difference. And so I, you know, had one of my friends who had negotiated like 6 or 7 offers, all by playing them against one another. And I was like, how do I do this? Give me a playbook. And that made me feel more confident approaching that situation. I still thought I was going to throw up on the phone when I was trying to negotiate, but I did. And I wish, looking back, that I had known more about how to negotiate my equity package. But what was really cool was that within my first, I think, 2 months, Docker got another round of funding, and I got a raise to adjust for. Yeah, they were like, you get a raise to adjust your salary to market rate. I was like, okay. So that felt really good to have them kind of, because I'd been telling them that in the negotiations, like, this is my last kind of standing point on why I want to take this other offer over yours. And so for them to address that when they did get more funding felt really good. And I was glad that I had kind of said that over and over, that this is like, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel right. And that then they adjusted it when they got the chance to.
Anyone else? Tips on how to go to Silicon Valley and get rich? Okay. Yeah.
I think it's a double-edged sword, I think, looking at that, because, for instance, I know of a lot of internship programs, like Facebook in particular has one, and a lot of the big tech companies will have programs that are specifically targeting underrepresented candidates and trying to bring them in at an internship level, because interns usually, if you do a good job, will return as full-time employees. And I think those are super, super, super critical in helping kind of seek out and almost pull people in who are not being pulled in by the normal process. So I think those are really, really good. The problem is, if you did go through that, yeah, someone might say, oh, you just got hired because you're a woman. I actually had someone say that they thought I was hired because my manager thought I was cute. And I was like, I didn't say it, but it was like, you didn't even go to college. And you're completely disregarding 2 of my degrees and saying that you think I got hired because I'm a woman and because my manager thinks I'm cute. Like, that to me was like very, very, I wanted to slap him. I didn't. But I think you will run into that, but I think the benefits of programs that help target people who are not being hired by the general system, or the system is not working for them, I think those are really important. So I think people will believe what they want to believe, and you just go out there and kick butt, and you'll prove them wrong.
I'm interested in the statistic of the fallout being at its highest for women of moving into the upper level, moving from entry level to upper level. So whether that's irrational or whether whether it has something to do with increasing stress, increasing pressure, increasing of whatever there's responsibilities of being available to clients and so on. What's behind that? Is it just women aren't confident and self-confident enough to ask for the raise, ask for the promotion? Or is there something about the promotion which they rightfully don't want to do?
Do you guys like confidence? I sure don't get the idea of that.
For what I've seen is it's primarily becoming mothers and priorities changing. And that's actually really where I've seen most of it. And that's where it's a decision of, I'm going to hire full-time daycare nannies to do this. That's a financial investment that they're going to make. So a lot of them may not make that. And then the other is tech is unfortunately 24/7, and a lot of it is, if you're not online at midnight, people think that you're not working. And at some point in your life, you may just say, it is not worth it to me to be up at midnight on Google Chat to prove that I'm working. But sometimes that visibility is more important than your actual outcomes. And so that also is where I think a lot of the culture needs to change. It's not even about male, female. It's the culture of the 24/7 working, and that's where females probably drop off as well. But at the same time, Google has produced outstanding numbers of female leaders right now that have just taken over in various areas of Silicon Valley. And I think that those just need to continue and to be mentors. But there are definitely sacrifices being made and a lot of money being invested in childcare.
I think part of it is also what's your perception of a leader in Silicon Valley. And I think right now you have people like Elon Musk, who just, you have this interesting kind of character, somebody who's actually notorious for frankly not treating women well. You have other characters like Aaron Levy, who's maybe a little socially awkward, but he's known for his red running shoes he wears and the jeans and the blazer, the cliche Silicon Valley uniform. And so for one, when you come to performance reviews, when you're trying to actually promote people into these positions, or if you get layered and you bring people in from the outside, what kind of person fits that image? And also when you get to the stage of a scaling startup, what kind of is that culture that you're kind of having within that company? And I think that's part of where you need to change that into what is that idea of what leadership looks like in Silicon Valley. And to the point Mayumi was bringing up is a lot of times in performance reviews, women are told, you aren't especially perky, you are being very blunt in your email tone, not saying, hey, with an exclamation point, I had this idea, but if you're perceived in that way, you're not going to get promoted, while a male who yells at his direct reports, that's considered being a strong leader in Silicon Valley and somebody who's going to advance. So I think it's a combination both of potentially departing the workforce, but also us determining what that leader looks like.
Are women-led firms organized differently? Do they run differently? Are they more open to women? Do they deal with these problems more effectively than firms that are run by men?
I don't know about firms, but I'd say you can look within companies at orgs. So for example, our legal org is run actually by Sally Yu, who went to Scripps and did her thesis at CMC actually. And she recently did a talk where she talked about how very much thinking about diversity hiring and the number of women in her team is on top of mind. And so it's something where a lot of that trickles down. So if you have leadership within an org that's very focused on kind of understanding these problems, is that you can see that kind of manifest into the change happening faster. I would assume that the analogy probably stands for a women-led firm, but you can see it within companies too, within teams.
Okay, on this side of the table.
Well, I think it's not just if a woman leads the firm, then you're going to end up with, you know, a better workplace environment for women. I think it matters what that woman's kind of attitude towards other women is. To your point earlier, there are some cases where if you get to the top and, you know, you were one of the only women, you kind of have this sense of like, I went through this really hard thing, it was hard for me. That doesn't necessarily make it so that you're going to make it easier for other people. You may be like, well, they have to go through the struggles I went through. I think, at least for me personally, I was attracted to the fact that I mentioned our VP of engineering as a woman. That was an actual decision point for me in choosing Docker over choosing Intuit or other companies that I had offers at, because I wanted to see somebody who I identified with being successful in a technical role. And that to me was a lot of motivation of like, okay, I can see myself being successful here in 10 years.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you guys, you brought a lot of good points and a lot of advice, and I really appreciate it. I'm sure every one of you does. But I was wondering if you could mention briefly, like you were talking about negotiating on the phone, but you almost threw up. Is there anything where it was like an obstacle or a class or a conversation that you felt like you weren't going to get through, whether that be because you're a woman or for some other reason, and you got through it, and that was just something that like, an obstacle for you that you got through, just about.
Sort of breakthrough point.
Yeah.
A major breakout experience? Or you broke through what, gender stereotypes or something like that? What we were talking about earlier.
Well, I think actually and this would kind of hold true for a lot of people, but I was having a hard time kind of getting my foot in the door at first with an internship, and I actually was not a software engineer until my full-time role now. I was doing product management, so still technical, but not actually coding all the time. And for me, I was having a really hard time getting in the doors because people kept telling me I wasn't technical enough. And I wasn't sure how much of that had to do with the fact that I didn't fit the stereotype of a programmer or an engineer, and how much it was just like, okay, somebody else in this candidate pool has a better resume, or et cetera. But I actually got my first internship through a CMC student who had worked there, and through kind of personal connections, and it was at a company that had a lot of CMCers. So I would say, like, getting your first internship and then using the people that you meet there to help find other opportunities in the future was really, really, really valuable. And a CMC alumni, more so than just a random person, is going to want to kind of fight for you and go out on a limb on your behalf to kind of make sure that they can find you a spot at your company, at their company, and that you're kind of taken care of. So that was a really big kind of breaking through point, because once I was there, my manager there hired me my full-time role. I met someone who brought me to another company, and et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, well, why don't we wrap it up? We're here for a while. I don't have a 110 class. They don't have a 110 class. And thank you all for coming. It was a very good audience, and to be continued.